All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Josh Fleetman. I am the Western Pennsylvania manager for Ceasefire PA. We are a state-based gun violence prevention advocacy organization. We organize with communities, we educate citizens and lawmakers, we hold public officials accountable, and we help build coalitions to primarily focus on gun violence prevention legislation here in Pennsylvania at the state capitol in Harrisburg, but also at the local level and federal levels as well. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for what should hopefully be a really interesting conversation. Just want to let you know a couple reminders. This session is being recorded and live streamed. We ask that everyone please stay masked while indoors and while they're not actively eating and drinking. The seats in the back of the room are set with some extra room for those who would like some additional space. And please keep the aisles and any marked accessibility spaces open and clear for the folks who need them. So I want to give you, the topic of the conversation today is building the movement for gun violence prevention. So wanted to give a just kind of quick synopsis of where I think the movement is currently. And I'll kind of categorize it as wins, opportunities, and challenges. We've had actually a number of wins just in the past couple of months, which we'll talk about, from federal legislation to Senate confirmation of key government officials to state progress here in Pennsylvania and across the country. There's a lot of opportunities where there's a lot of momentum behind the movement at the grassroots level. And of course, there are challenges. I think some of the wins we've seen and some of the recent events, in some segment of our population just drives them to get even more hardened and extreme in their views. And I think that's being exposed in kind of the way gun violence as an issue has kind of become yet another front on the culture wars, the broader culture wars politically in this country. So I think I overall feel pretty positive about where the movement is going, but I think this should be a really good discussion about kind of digging into those details here. So want to introduce our panelists, let them introduce themselves, let you all know that there are full bios of all of our panelists in the app as well. First off, let's start with Reverend Eileen Smith. She's a registered nurse and executive director of the South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here today. And I am the co-founder and executive director of South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace, which actually was founded in 2005 after the gun violence murder of a 16-year-old youth in the parking lot of the high school that he attended in South Pittsburgh. And at that time, I was a public health nurse and violence and prevention, injury prevention consultant for the Southwest Pennsylvania Department of Health, and I was on the board of the founding board, the Birmingham Foundation, and that's why I became involved. So after all those years, I'm retired as a public health nurse, still active as a nurse in the realm of violence prevention, which is a public health problem. I'm also a full-time pastor, and so that all ties in together. And former trauma nurse, ICU nurse, and so I've seen a lot of death, but I've seen too much death at the hands of gun violence.
Thank you, Reverend. Next up, we have Carolyn Bann. She is chair of the steering committee for an organization locally here called Squirrel Hill Stands Against Gun Violence.
Good morning and welcome. And if you haven't been to Pittsburgh, welcome to Pittsburgh, which is a city I love. But Pittsburgh does have problems. You can hear me? Okay, I'll put this more central. Let me move things around. Actually, let me see if I can take this off the stand. I may not be able to. Yes. I think that's much better. Yes. Thank you, Josh. Carolyn Bann. So I was about to say Pittsburgh is a wonderful city and a beautiful city and enjoy it, but we have problems. And one of those problems is gun violence, and gun violence of various kinds. So my organization grew out of Congregation Dor Hadash, which was one of the 3 congregations attacked at the Tree of Life building in 2018. And I was chair at that point of the Social Action Committee of that congregation, which had led a discussion that because of which our congregation committed ourselves to working with refugees and immigrants, and that's why the whole building was attacked. We continue to support refugees. We're about to sponsor a whole family that's arriving from the Congo very shortly. But we also wanted to found a separate organization that could lobby and encourage people to vote and educate people about gun violence. I'm not going to talk, we don't have time for me right now to talk about how we created a new organization from scratch, but if people want to bring that up during the Q&A, feel free to. But we partner with all of the people at the table.
Thank you, Carolyn. And finally, Pastor Tim Smith, CEO and founder of the Center of Life.
Morning, everybody. It's good to be here, and thank you, Josh, for the invitation. We run an organization in the community called Hazelwood here in the city, and Hazelwood is a community that has experienced generational both economic and racial discrimination. Gun violence has been one of those challenges that we have faced for many years. And at Center of Life, we do music and arts, we do education, athletics, family strengthening, community partnerships, community health workers. So we've tried to work with really the whole family over the years that we've been around. We're in our 21st year right now. And of course, one of the things that we've had to deal with is really trying to keep guns out of the hands of young people. And so we're good? Okay. And so we have a particular program that we run that impacts a lot of young people, where we deal with both mental and physical health. And it's a hip-hop program. It's a hip-hop and health program where young people do their research. They look at the issues that are surrounding guns or mental health and different things. And then they take sort of the technical language of the health industry and they create a youth-friendly kind of hip-hop language, and they perform. And we talk to kids about making some better decisions. And so I'm glad to be a part of this discussion, and hopefully we can all come up with some more answers to what needs to happen.
Thank you, Tim. So I'd like to start us off with a more kind of general question to help you all get a better understanding of the roots of the societal issue of gun violence. There are obviously many different types of gun violence, from community-based shootings to domestic violence, mass shootings, suicides, unintentional shootings, and shootings by police officers. Each type impacts different kinds of people and communities, and each has their own unique causes and solutions. So if I could ask each of our panelists to share what you believe the causes of gun violence are, whether it be the specific type of gun violence in your community or that drove you to get into this work, or more broadly. I want to start with Carolyn, please.
Thank you. Josh gave you an excellent overall list of some of the types of gun violence. To talk in depth about the causes of gun violence, we could talk for hours and still not cover it because there are so many different types of gun violence with different causes and therefore different approaches for trying to solve the problem. I obviously was affected when my congregation was attacked and a dear friend was killed and another almost died. And that certainly motivated me to look at mass murder as a type of gun violence. It's probably the type that gets the most media attention. It's the most dramatic. It isn't the most common. And many people don't know this, but over 60% of deaths by gun violence nationwide are by suicide. And we were just speaking earlier with a legislator from Vermont who, what was the statistic from Vermont? 84%. 84% of deaths by gun in Vermont are suicides. So, and this is something that cuts across all parts of society, including rural societies, young people, old people. And we need to keep that in mind. And it's kind of a hidden epidemic. And of course, we have huge problems in communities where there is violence, gang violence, street crime, other kinds of violence. I'm not the best person to talk about that, but fortunately, two of those people are with us who can really address those issues from a much closer focus. But fundamentally, right now, one of the biggest causes of the increase in gun violence is the increase in access to guns. And we have an epidemic of people buying guns out of fear, they have guns, we should have guns. And so the huge increase in the number of guns is critical to what is causing the increase. About 40% of American households have a gun. A lot of households have multiple guns. There are way more guns out there than there are people. That's pretty scary. I was talking with the panelists before this session about the fact that we really need to educate people on the fact that they're not safer with a gun, they're less safe. And if they have gone ahead and bought a gun, there are ways to make their family and themselves safer through safe handling. But we have huge problems with guns everywhere. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Carolyn. Tim?
Yeah, so I think in the case of many underserved communities, one of the easiest things for young people to get, I know in our particular community, has been a gun and drugs. So both those two things have worked pretty much together in our community. And when you think about the cause of somebody grabbing a gun, if it's the easiest thing to get, it's the quickest thing, and it's probably, in their minds, especially after watching TV and watching movies, becoming desensitized with video games and all kinds of things, it's very easy to shoot somebody and just keep going and go watch it on the news. But one of the biggest problems is how easy it is to get a gun. You know, there was a time when I was living in Hazelwood, in the church. I went out on a Saturday morning, and I remember this like it was yesterday. And about 100 feet away from our door, there was a Jeep Cherokee, with cream-colored Jeep Cherokee that was sitting there, and it was full of U.S.-issued artillery guns. It was full. You couldn't even sit in the vehicle. The windows were down, and the vehicle was just sitting there. And some of my neighbors came out. We just kind of looking at each other, speechless. We called the police. We, made the police report. Police came. They called one of those big, trailers, and they towed the vehicle away. Then we went up to the police station and made a police report. We never heard anything about it. We never heard anything on the news, nothing. And we're thinking to ourselves, how does something like this get in our community? How does this get? But it made us understand even more, how our young people are able to get guns so quickly. So I think, access to these guns is a huge problem.
Thank you. Eileen?
There's just so many.
Speak into the mic, please.
So many issues that lead to gun violence. The COVID pandemic had a lot to do with it.
It works better if you take it off the
That's what I'm
stand.
doing. My organization has a group called the South Pittsburgh Peacemakers, Street Outreach Violence Interrupters.
There's a problem between your mic and the intercom system.
You're good now.
Testing. Okay, that's
Better.
good. Yeah. So as I was saying, our program has a lot of initiatives, and the main one is our South Pittsburgh Peacemakers Street Intervention Outreach Team. And we're finding that illegal guns are so prevalent on the street, starting with 14-year-olds going to the pool, carrying a gun, and being reported to us to come down and do an intervention. Youth violence is just totally out of control. And it's just, it's lack of, and basically, let's go back to the fact that violence affects the African-American community the most, large disparity there. We're looking at 18 to 34 age group in African-American males. We've had 9 homicides just in the neighborhood of South Pittsburgh. Only one of those were Caucasian. And 2 kids, 16 years old, shot and killed in the street. It's same nuisance market, same place, 9 months from each other. So we're looking at the absence of African-American role models, and the jails are full of them. Mothers are left to vie for themselves and need help themselves. There's too many bars in our neighborhood. Drugs, alcohol, not enough police to enforce the streets. And so that's why we do what we do. But I just think that it's out of control. It is a pandemic, and we have to treat it like it is a pandemic and a public health problem. That can be cured. But these are just some of the issues: housing, lack of jobs, transportation, all of these things we work with in our organization. We have a referral resource coordinator that takes these people that we find on the streets and telling them that there's a better way to do things, giving them alternatives, helping them to find other ways instead of violence. It's at a point with the young people, they're not fighting anymore, fist fighting, all that. They have a problem, they just shoot each other to kill. Social media is another problem. A lot of things go on social media, which we do watch to a certain extent and pass the word on to parents if things are getting ready to go down. So those are just some of the issues that contribute to violence, specifically gun violence.
Thank you, Eileen. Yeah, I think really hit the nail on the head there in terms of access to guns. You know, a lot of countries have people with mental health problems, with kids that play violent video games, but most of the countries in the world do not have the sheer number of guns and the ease of access. And then when you pair that with the systemic racism and ongoing social problems that have been concentrated in Black and brown communities, that really accounts for a lot of what we're seeing in this crisis. So that was a little bit depressing. I want to focus most of the conversation on solutions, because there are a lot of solutions. As we've talked about, gun violence is a multifaceted issue. There is no single policy that we can pass that will address all these types of gun violence, but we should be very clear that gun violence is in many ways a problem that is solvable through sound public policies. There's clear state-level data that the states with stronger gun laws have less gun violence. And the levels of violence we're experiencing are in many ways a political choice and a policy choice that has been made to do nothing. So let's talk about what policies are effective at reducing gun violence and also at strategically harnessing the energy around this issue to build the coalitions and strengthen the movement as a whole. I find it's helpful to divide gun violence prevention policy into 2 kind of major buckets. The first is about limiting access to firearms, as we've talked about, to stop guns from getting into the wrong hands. And second is about addressing those root causes, the mental, emotional, and economic drivers of violence. So in that first bucket, making it harder for guns to get into the wrong hands, what legislation do you think we should be focusing on at the state and/or federal levels? Carolyn.
Thank you. Hold on one sec. I need just a sip of water. Thank you, Josh. Most people expect me at this point to say we have to ban assault rifles. And certainly they are used in mass murder. That's not where I'd start. Certainly it's on our list, but I wouldn't put it at the top of my list. For a lot of the kinds of gun violence we're talking about, I think extreme risk protection orders, also known as red flag laws, are very important. for suicides and for other kinds of violence. I think they make domestic violence, other kinds, they make a difference. I think universal background checks are really important. And besides banning assault weapons, I would put even higher than that, banning high-capacity magazines, because a lot of guns can be modified that are not technically assault rifles to shoot rapidly, but banning high-capacity magazines will at least reduce the body count, alas. Other areas I would like to see legislation in are requiring people, holding people accountable for reporting lost and stolen firearms, which is a big problem. And I don't know if it's an issue of legislation, but educating people on safe storage and how to use their guns safely is a big issue. And we were talking earlier about people not only putting them in their glove box, but leaving them openly on the seat of their car, which is unlocked. I mean, really. So all of those kinds of efforts can reduce the flow of illegal guns or reduce the ease of getting a gun. They're very important. Can we get these passed? We will talk more later about the political side of this, the electoral side. But people have asked me what I think about the legislation that passed the federal government. It was a baby step. It was a small, modest bill that didn't go very far. It was still, I think, the best that they could have gotten under the circumstances. And we'll talk about, I hope we'll have the time to talk about the resistance to legislation. Our legislator from Vermont just also talked to me about how difficult it is to get anything other than very modest legislation passed. But we'll talk more about that as we go forward.
I
If you'd like
agree
to add
with,
anything, yeah.
okay, I agree with everything that Carolyn has said. There's a major problem in the community, in the streets, where guns are a dime a dozen. They're not going to purchase these guns. These guns are illegal, trafficking of guns, and I think there needs to be a serious focus on that problem. Just a few days ago, there was a gun deal that went bad. Sold a gun to a guy and then demanded it back and took the gun back and shot him. Okay, so it's stuff like that that's incredible, horrendous, horrific things that are going on with these guns in the street that you can get anywhere. So I think there needs to be a serious focus on stopping that kind of activity.
I think in addition to that, now it's my mic. I think in addition,
Straight him back, yeah.
yeah. Wow. It's musical mics.
They're one away, so we don't even try to use it.
I think in addition to that, I think there should be even more aggressive screening, more careful screening. You know, the issue of gun violence is not just in underserved communities. It's in almost every community. It's just not reported the same way that it's reported in many of our black and brown or underserved communities. And I think that there should be legislation on the books that really call for, in many cases, call for a psychological evaluation. If you're going to buy a gun, you're going to have something in your hand that's going to be able to take somebody's life. When I get in a car, I could take somebody's life if I drive, irresponsibly. But I have to take a test. I have to make sure that I'm able to drive, that I understand the laws of the road, and that I can keep the rules when I'm out there. Well, if you have a gun, you have so much power to be able to take somebody's life, and you shouldn't be able to just get that just by going to a gun store, or just by saying, okay, I don't have a record, so I can get a gun. No, I think if you're going to have a gun, you're going to have there's the possibility that you could take somebody's life. And some people would say, yeah, I need to protect myself too. You got to protect yourself too, but there's so many people that are getting these guns, and it's not just for protection. It's really about power and control, and it's about getting something that they want, or stopping somebody else from getting something that they want. So I think there needs to be more aggressive screening in the front, right on the front end.
Thank you. So, recognizing that
In the very back there.
we'll have questions at the end. We'll have time. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. So recognizing that organizing and building the power required to pass this kind of legislation takes time. We all are, very urgent about that. But also recognizing that, as we've talked about, primarily Black and brown communities are suffering under a surge of shootings. The gun violence prevention movement as a whole has really added an increasing emphasis on kind of non-legislative public policy solutions that can more immediately help reduce this gun violence. I'm talking about increased public funding for violence prevention and intervention grant programs, such as those run by Reverends Eileen and Tim. That's that second policy bucket I was talking about to address the root causes of gun violence. Here in Pennsylvania, as an example, our Republican-dominated state legislature actually passed a historic $105 million in funding for violence prevention and intervention grants to go to local nonprofits, to schools, to local governments who are running, evidence-based, innovative programs that can help address some of this violence. A lot of that has been funded by federal COVID relief money, actually. So for so long, the gun violence prevention movement has focused on that issue of access to guns, which, of course, is critical, but they've neglected this more immediate bipartisan opportunity to increase public funding to address the root causes. So it's really important we take time to understand that. Tim and Eileen, if you could please talk about the importance of these publicly funded grant programs, and then really help our audience understand, how do your programs actually work to prevent and reduce violence? We'll start with Tim, please, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
you start with me? Okay, here we go. Yeah, I think the fundings that are supposed to be earmarked for really helping us to control gun violence in our communities is an opportunity. Now, in many of our cases, in many of our communities, we have to make sure that the funding gets to us, because a lot of times it doesn't. And so, we do have programs. We have programs that need to be fueled with some funding. And programs don't run without people. And so, in order for us to run our programs, we need the right people in the right place. And it helps us to put together more aggressive education, and so that we can have people that are more informed about what guns can do, the power of having a gun in your hand, having a gun in your house, having a gun under your pillow, or under your bed, all of those kinds of things. People may feel they have the sense of safety, but we have to educate them and help them to understand the danger of having something like that. Guns have to be maintenanced. Guns have to be maintenance. You can have a gun in your house, and you may not use it for the longest time, and all of a sudden you go to use it and it clams up on you, or it backfires on you, or there's all kinds of things that can happen with weapons that people don't understand. And funding, the right kind of funding coming into our programs will help us to be able to educate people from the home. We can educate also in our partnerships with schools, in our school districts as well, in our churches as well, and many of our service providers within our community, so that people have a better understanding. We've never had to have this conversation around guns at this level, because we hadn't been seeing it at this level before. Now, we've seen a lot of shootings in our community. We've seen in our community, when I first started working in our community, maybe a few years later after I got there, the average young man had a gun by the age of 14 for sure. And or the average young man was in a lockup facility by the age of 14 too. And a lot of young women were pregnant by the age of 14 as well. I was doing funerals for basically kids between the age of 14 and 26. So, and I've done more funerals than I can count. At one point between the late 90s and the early 2000s, I was doing a funeral almost every 4 weeks. And so these were drive-by shootings. These were, random drive-by shootings. Some of them were targeted, some of them weren't. But they had all kinds of guns. All kinds of guns were in their hands. And so, opportunities to take our funding and create curriculum and create programs that are contextual, something that people can really understand, something that people can get their heads around, something that doesn't threaten, give them a sense that that they're threatened without a gun. So I think the funding is helpful.
Thank you. And Eileen, if you could specifically talk about the South Pittsburgh Peacemakers, which is a great program here in Pittsburgh.
Sure. 4 years ago, we saw a need for street outreach violence interventionists. We were not funded. We got a small grant from the Birmingham Foundation, whose umbrella we sit under. These gentlemen did this work without pay. I oversaw everything without pay. 3 years ago, we got our first major grant from Everytown for gun safety out of New York. We've been funded by them ever since, but it has not been enough money. We then received a PCCD grant, which gave us the opportunity to expand and meet the needs of the community regarding violence prevention.
That's that state government program, PCCD.
That's state government program, for those of you who don't know what PCCD is. So we were very grateful for that. The grants are very competitive, so therefore there needs to be more grant monies being released, which we're very excited about. Our state budget that is going to release a lot of money for such initiatives as ours. Evidence-based street outreach prevention programs are very effective, operating from a public health standard model. And programs like ours, South Pittsburgh Peacemakers, Cure Violence, Group Violence Intervention. But there has to be that continuing flow of money to sustain what we do, not a grant for a year and then it goes away and you scrap and find other monies. So, I'm very pleased with the president releasing some of that money, and for our state government as well, because this is what really works. We have to be out there, not as policemen, but as interventionists, doing mediations, preventing retaliations, working with families, mentoring young people, getting into those homes where there are no fathers, getting into those schools, teach these kids how to become a man without shooting and killing each other. So that's what we do. We have 4 outreach workers and a chaplain. We have a media consultant that does awareness with social media. We have a coordinator that finds resources for all of the issues. Even we find kids in laundromats, no homes, but they're going to get that gun and they're going to eat the best way that they can, even if they have to shoot somebody. So this money is absolutely essential for evidence-based violence prevention programs to stop the violence using a public health model.
Thank you, Reverend Eileen. I want to keep the conversation going, but just the final policy piece here, that Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed at the federal level and signed into law, I think I would agree with Carolyn's assessment that it certainly was not a comprehensive solution to the gun violence crisis, but it was an important step forward. It was the first piece of gun safety legislation passed in 30 years. The NRA lost. They were actively opposing this legislation. And so I think it is worth noting that that's a major win, and I hope will give us some more momentum. I want to talk more about the kind of political landscape because, policy, there's no shortage of good policy ideas, but if the politics are not right to get them passed, we're going to keep hitting that wall. So Gun violence, it's not just a public health crisis, it is a top political issue. A recent poll by Giffords, which is a national gun violence prevention group, showed that 66% of likely general election voters here in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania said that doing more to prevent gun violence was either the most important or a very important issue for their personal voting. And obviously, we're in a unique political moment right now after that federal win, and as high levels of community violence and mass shootings remain a top issue for many voters, and in the wake of that Supreme Court decision that struck down New York State's gun law, all of that has, at the same time, emboldened pro-gun activists. So, Carolyn, if I could ask you, what's your read of the political landscape on this issue?
Thanks. It's complicated, of course. Here in the city of Pittsburgh, following the attack on Tree of Life building, the city government passed 3 laws introducing regulation of the sale of guns and so on. And there is a very strong organized, both NRA and other organizations in favor of guns that opposed it. And we have a state law that's called preemption. And so the state government says that cities can't regulate guns because states do. And so that's still in the courts. So doing anything at a local level is very difficult. Doing everything at a state level is also difficult. And I think the key point right now as we come into the campaign season is if we want better gun laws, we have to have different legislators. We have to devote our energies to electing people who will support the kind of legislation we need. We'll have to get off our you-know-what and get out there and work every day if we can from now to the election. The state of Pennsylvania has been helped by a somewhat reduction of the amount of gerrymandering. There will be more competitive districts. We have a better chance of electing some good legislators who care about this issue, but we have to push legislators hard. I remember vividly, and this has now been a couple of discussions, with our outgoing senator, who I don't even need to name, who is a Republican and who actually did pass this law and who does care about this issue. But when I said to him, the vast majority of your voters want legislation. They want better gun laws. And he said, yeah, but it's the NRA and their supporters who are the outspoken, vocal people who are in my face all the time and who vote just on that issue. And your voters aren't as committed. Unless we can prove to legislators that we really care about this and it is going to affect our vote, they're going to pay attention to the other guys who make more noise. We need to make noise too. So we need to fight this issue vocally, aggressively, at every level if we're going to make a difference. And that's the job of organizations like mine.
Thank you. It is unfortunate that it takes horrific mass shootings to focus political attention on this issue. As Carolyn mentioned earlier, while mass shootings such as Uvalde are comparatively rare, but capture the national media attention, the community violence we've talked about that specifically impacts Black and brown communities, it continues to escalate with little attention from national media and policymakers. But with the renewed movement for racial justice following the murder of George Floyd, we have been seeing growing recognition of how preventing violence in Black and brown communities is critical to equity. So, Reverends Tim and then Eileen, from your perspective, how have you seen the dynamic shift in the past few years? If so, in what way? And how has the role of the undeniable racial element of gun violence changed in our political discourse?
I think in any time you're dealing with something that has been a problem this long, and it is coupled with so many other things that we have to address in our communities, it has taken building relationships. It was taken for us to be able to build the kind of relationships that we need to gain the trust so that people understand what we're trying to say to them and have a better understanding of the whole situation. I think we've seen more and more of our families getting involved, whether there's a father and a mother or whatever the family structure is. We're seeing parents get involved more. They're not being silent as much as they used to be. There was times when there were shootings and nobody would say anything. We've have systems in place now where people can remain anonymous, but they can come forward and they can share the things that they need to share. That has been helpful. But also we have people reaching out and saying, hey, listen, you know, we want to know more. We want more education. Or we want our children to be in a safe program. We want them to be in a safe program where they don't have to worry about getting shot, where people have their clearances, you know, all those kinds of things. And so we see that. We see more and more families that are coming into our programs. But I think it's not just a matter of coming into the programs, but they're more and more engaged. They're listening. They're watching the news. They're reading. They're finding out, you know, that the only way to make these changes is to get involved, is to, you know, do everything that you can to protect not just your home, but to protect the community that your home is in.
Thank you. Eileen?
I agree with that totally, Pastor Tim. But there's more care taken by the police and local government to hire social workers and so on to work with the police so that they're not so aggressive when they're stopping and searching, which is a movement in itself to try to get rid of that law or whatever it is. But data shows that there has been no real progress. It's since George Floyd, the activists are the ones that are creating the movement, okay? And the activists are very strong. Black Lives Matter all over the country, stopping traffic, protesting, and all of those types of things, and making their voices heard. But still, African Americans are being killed by police at a greater rate than whites, but I think that there is an attempt to do better by that, but there needs to be better training of the police officers. They're too aggressive. Community resource officers have been working with us in our community and doing things together. And I think that's a very positive thing, and we need to continue to go in that direction.
Thank you. As we start to wrap up here and then take questions, I wanted to kind of focus on the path forward for the gun violence prevention movement. If I could have each of our panelists speak for 1 or 2 minutes pretty briefly about how can we continue to build the political power, expand the understanding, and build the coalitions at the local, state, and federal levels for the gun violence prevention movement. Carolyn?
Yeah, I think this is critical. This is not something we can do little by little with separate small groups. We really need to work together, both locally, state and at national level. I'm very proud of the fact that in this area, in southwestern Pennsylvania, groups are working together both in the region and statewide, and that's very important. It is telling that we've all known each other for some time. We didn't just meet sitting here on this podium, because we all work together. There's a woman here from Moms Demand Action. We work with moms. We work with Gifford. We all coordinate. And there is strength in numbers. It's just critical that we work together. I want to just mention one thing that's relatively new, and Reverend Eileen is with me in this effort. I felt that the one thing we were missing was the voice of clergy. And I helped found within Squirrel Hill Stands something called the Clergy Council of Squirrel Hill Stands. Now, it gets complicated. Squirrel Hill Stands is actually a program of Ceasefire PA, so we work with Josh on this too. But we want clergy to stand up and speak out and say, this is morally unacceptable. And if you want information on this, I will have cards for you later. But our next vigil is going to be in September. It's National Suicide Prevention Month. I've asked Reverend Eileen to speak. And we're bringing together people from across the region to talk about gun violence and to honor the people who have died since our last vigil. So that's just an example of a specific activity. And Josh can speak about what Ceasefire PA is doing statewide, which is very important.
Thank you. Tim?
So one of the ways that we're building more momentum and more power from within our community is by working through our collaborations. We have a thing called the Greater Hazelwood Community Collaborative. And through that, it's a 41-member organization, it's members that are both community-based and non-community-based service providers. And through that, we are able to bring in our politicians and, talk to them, hold them accountable, to make sure they understand what it is that we need, what it is that has been promised, make sure that the subject matter does not fall off the table. And so thankfully, we have people in our coalitions and in our collaborations that are connected in the world of politics, as well as in some of the other places, corporations, education, or industry, on and on. But it's helpful for us as we talk about how we can handle the issues of guns and gun violence in our communities, and look for greater remedies, look for more power that we can be given in our communities, because it really does start with us. It starts with us, and then we have to help our politicians and our public officials understand this is what we need. It's an inside job, and so that's where I feel like we got to start.
Thank you. Eileen?
We have to bring it home to people that we are in this struggle together. Our organization is made up of a conglomeration of residents, providers, agencies, faith-based initiatives, all working together in this movement of violence prevention. We have to keep doing that. But someone said it takes a village to do everything, but especially to stop this gun violence pandemic. So that includes policymakers, activists, politicians, public sector, private sector, organizations such as Ceasefire, Moms Demand Actions, who's all part of our movement to stop gun violence. And we need to work together to cure this pandemic using public health models and street outreach interventionists and anything else that we can do. But we can't be in competition, can't work against each other. We all have to work together because every disease is curable, and so is violence.
Thank you. I think that through line throughout all those comments is absolutely right. The path forward is together. We can't be siloed on our individual issue-based areas. We can't be focused just in our insular neck of the woods. Gun violence, by its very nature, as we talked about, impacts a cross-section of society, which is awful, but it also creates a political strategy opportunity. If we can bring in, people who are in the rural areas who are concerned about suicide, if we can bring in faith leaders who can speak to the moral imperative, if we can bring in veterans and police officers who are at a higher risk of suicide, doctors and nurses who are seeing the impacts of gun violence on the front lines, local officials, local elected officials who in Pennsylvania are not legally allowed to pass legislation, but can serve as a community and convening role. It takes all of us, and that's been our approach at Ceasefire. We've built a statewide coalition of all those groups, 130 groups and counting. We go to Harrisburg every year, at least once, for Advocacy Day. We organize in-district meetings with legislators. We organize rallies and discussions just like this to educate the public. So I would encourage everyone in this room to find some organization, some way to get involved, because you don't have to be expert on this issue. You don't have to be a card-carrying member of Moms Demand Action or other groups, although you certainly should be if you'd like to. Anybody can get involved in this movement, and that's really what it's going to take to build the power and the understanding to get these kinds of laws and investments passed. So we've got about 10 minutes left, time for questions. We have our volunteer, Donna, here. Please speak your question into the mic so folks online can hear it. I see the woman in the Moms Demand shirt first. Please go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. I agree with Josh that everyone should be a member of Moms Demand Action. So if you want to take out your phone and text READY to the number 64433, you can find a way to get active in your community at home. I do want to say, though, that I think that we should all take a moment to celebrate what did happen with passing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This was a groundbreaking thing. Like we said, it's 30 years since the last time that they passed any gun safety legislation, and that was truly bipartisan. We had 14 senators that are a member of the GOP vote for it. Senator Todd Young in Indiana said that he received 10-to-1 phone calls in favor of it from his constituents. We drove over 1 million calls to the Senate. We shut down the Senate switchboard. Like, this is a moment that the entire movement really won, and I think we need to remember to celebrate those moments to help us keep going and keep in this fight, because it's hard, man. So thank you to everybody on the panel. I really appreciate you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. In the front here.
Hello, thank you all for speaking today. It's been a wonderful panel. I had a question for everyone, but especially Reverend Eileen Smith. You mentioned that the police have been working more with community resource officers. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit of detail about what role they play when it comes to gun violence and the relationship they have with programs like yours, and maybe how the use of community resource officers can be improved.
Use your mic.
These officers, we consider to be friends of the community and friends of our organization. We know them very, very well. They are very active in the community. They also run projects. They collaborate with us in the programs that we run. And they understand what we do on the streets. They know us. They don't arrest our people who are out there trying to stop violence. They're really good to have out there in the streets. They do cookouts and all kind of activities, and they always involve what we do. We are probably the most major violence prevention group in Pittsburgh, but especially South Pittsburgh, which has become a hot spot in the last few years. So we tie into them. We don't snitch. We don't give them information or anything like that. They're just called resource officers, and there is a certain number of them that work in the community and show up and let everybody know, you know, we're on your side. We're out here for the same purpose of saving lives and making a difference. So they work very well with us. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Tim.
I think, you know, in addition to what Reverend Smith just mentioned, is that community resource officers are a familiar face. Like, it's probably somebody that we grew up with, you know, and that means a lot. That means a whole lot, because the trust is there. They know the journey. They've walked down the path, and in many cases, they may even have a family member that may have been a victim of gun violence. And so we feel like they're there for us, you know, and it's a good partnership.
Hi, I'm wondering, how do you go about teaching, say, a 14-year-old the moral piece of this, that death is forever, and you don't shoot somebody just because you felt disrespected or they stole your sneakers or your jacket, that's not what, you know, a responsible human being does?
Good question. First of all, it starts in the home, but our peacemakers have a chaplain, and I myself work with them. Our peacemakers mentor these young people, and they bring them to the chaplain. We talk to them, but it's up to every pastor, every minister, every faith-based initiative to get out there and speak a word to these young people who don't know any better, who don't have role models, and all that they've seen is violence, and they're traumatized, and we all know that violence begets violence. And Pastor Tim and I were just talking about it this morning and what needs to be done, from the faith-based initiative, and I'll have him elaborate on that as well.
Okay. Yeah, so your question is a challenging question, because I think like Reverend Smith just said, pretty much everything starts at home. And then when the kids come to us, when we get around the kids, they come with a backpack full of issues. There are a lot of things that they're dealing with. What we try to do is put them into a situation where they can. I believe there's three things that we have to give to kids, not just kids, but adults as well. We have to give them a sense of belonging. We have to give them a sense of significance and a sense of security. And when a young person understands the value of their own life, then they probably have the capacity to value somebody else's life, And so we try to do that. That's basically our philosophy of environment, to make sure that those three things are happening for the human being that is involved in our programs.
A lot of these kids are fearless. They will shoot anybody, babies, women, and each other. And so your point on letting them know that death is final, they don't know that. They're unchurched. Their parents are unchurched, and so they don't know that. So that is the importance of us having a chaplain on our team, and for people like myself and Pastor Tim to be out there in the trenches with these kids and getting them into mentoring programs.
Hi. I'd like to just hear if you have any suggestions around the issue with illegal guns. So I'm thinking both in terms of strategies within communities and also possibly legislatively, like how, what are some things that have worked to address the issue of all of the illegal guns that are on the streets?
I can speak to the policy piece. Carolyn mentioned legislation to require lost and stolen guns be reported. It sounds simple, but it's actually very effective. One study showed that states with that law have 46% fewer illegal guns trafficked than states that do not have that law. Here in Pennsylvania, we are surrounded by states, except for West Virginia, that have this kind of law. So we are kind of an outlier in the region, and because of that, we contribute to exporting illegal guns to other states. So that would be a state-based policy. At the federal level, and we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but there's an entire government agency, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, that regulates gun dealers. And there's already lots of laws on the books regulating gun dealers. They have to do, not just background checks, all sorts of things. And there's a great study by Brady, another one of our national gun violence prevention partners, that looks specifically at Pennsylvania. And there is a very small handful, couple dozen maybe, gun dealers in Pennsylvania, and I wager to say it's pretty similar in most other states. Just a handful of gun dealers that are flouting federal law. They're basically gone rogue, and the ATF, because of a lack of resources, because of a lack of leadership, because of a lack of political power and credibility, in many ways intentionally designed so by Republicans in Congress, the ATF has to date not really used their authority to crack down on those gun dealers. The ATF could tomorrow revoke their licenses, and they would be put out of the business of selling guns. So that's something we're calling for, is a more aggressive enforcement strategy, using existing law, not even passing a new law, to hold gun dealers accountable, to make sure they're following the law and not fueling the gun trafficking and straw purchasing crisis. On the community side, if you wanted to add anything in terms of illegal guns in the community, please feel free to. So,
For us, and I gave you one example of how we've seen just an inordinate amount of illegal guns in our community, and for us, it's a matter of really, again, going back to our politicians, going back to them and saying, look, showing them exactly what we're talking about. Years ago, when I mentioned the event of seeing all those guns in that Jeep, we didn't quite know what to do, and so we just made a police report. And again, there was nobody who even reported on it. It didn't even come on the news. The media didn't even report on it. So it was almost like it didn't happen. But now that we have coalitions of people that are working together, we have ways of making sure that there is pressure. We also, we'll take it to the media. We'll make sure that there's a press release that goes out. We'll do a lot of different things to make sure that we put the situation on blast so that people understand, that this is not cool. The shootings, the recent shootings that were in Hazelwood, it just seems like these kids were able to get these guns so easily, and their parents didn't know that they had the guns, and we don't know where they're getting the guns from, So it's not a situation where we even really know where the guns are coming from, but we know they're coming in, and we know most of those guns are not registered, and a good deal of those guns have what we have bodies on them. So in other words, they've been used to kill somebody, or they've been used to hurt somebody. But we're working hard to try to keep this into the face of our politicians and leaders.
Do we have time for one more question? Are we okay? Okay, great. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your work in this community and in Pennsylvania. My name's Poe Murray. I've been leading the Newtown Action Alliance. It's a grassroots national organization formed after my neighbor killed 20 children and 6 educators in Sandy Hook. So our hearts have been with your community after your massacre in your community, and we've been advocating for a comprehensive set of solutions to tackle this issue. But one of our priorities has been on passing an assault weapons ban. We believe it's critical. We're meeting more and more survivors and families who have been impacted by mass shootings, where their children have been decapitated by these weapons of war. So we've been following the Senate race very closely here in Pennsylvania. We're really excited that John Fetterman is doing really well, and he's moving up in the polls, and he has been
Oz is not doing
unapologetic.
well.
Yeah, and he's been unapologetic about his stance for gun violence prevention. He supports an assault weapons ban, et cetera. So my question to you, Josh, is I think you've endorsed candidates in the past. Do you expect to do that again this year, based on the support for gun violence prevention measures?
Yeah, thank you, Poe. And I see your emails in the listserv all the time. It's nice to meet you in person. So by the nature of us being a state-based group, yes, we do make endorsements. We're focusing on the state-level races. So we are not making endorsements personally in federal races. But we have, to your point, and to Carolyn's point, understand the critical importance of electing gun safety candidates. But we're mostly focused at the state level. Okay, well, we're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm happy to stick around and help answer any questions offline, but thank you for coming. Thank you to our panelists as well.